Waitress Kim So-yeon was fired on false charges. She refused to take the blame, even at the cost of her job. Clan head Park Jin-ho was impressed. In a world built on lies, her honesty was a novelty. He proposed a deal. She would open a flower shop, the perfect front for his business. He would provide the money, a clean exchange. But a simple cover became his only safe haven. And their business relationship turned into a forbidden attraction. And when a competitor decided to destroy the salon to get to Jin-ho, they both had to answer one question. What was more important? The business or the person who became its meaning? Jin-ho leaned back in his chair as Min-seok finished his report. Business was going smoothly. Too smoothly, in fact, which was sometimes alarming. Police? Jin-ho asked, looking out the window. Our contacts at the department confirmed that no inspections are planned. They're happy with the stability in the area. Good. Make sure their satisfaction costs more. Not much. His father had risen through brute force and intimidation. Jin-ho considered it primitive. Why frighten people when you can make their well-being directly dependent on your peace of mind? Officials, police officers, judges, all were shareholders in his silent enterprise. Their dividends were his immunity. A sudden noise from the reception area made Min-seok jump. Jin-ho only slowly turned his head. What's there? Min-seok looked out and immediately returned, turning pale. It's Mr. Lee, one of our creditors. He insists on a meeting. Very loudly. Jin-ho sighed, a relic of his father's time. He nodded. A heavy-set man with a flushed face burst into the office. Pak, your man hasn't given me the interest. I demand... Sit down, Mr. Lee. Jin-ho's voice was quiet, but the room seemed to freeze. You're shouting. It's indecent. Lee froze, but didn't give in. My money. Your money, Jin-ho interrupted, standing up, was invested in a project you approved yourself. There's a 3-day delay due to a bank audit. It's stipulated in Clause 4.2 of your contract. Min-seok, show it to Mr. Lee. While the assistant frantically searched for the document, Jin-ho approached the window, his back to the guest. I appreciate your impatience. It's understandable. But there are rules in my office. One of them is silence. By violating it, you call into question not only my competence, but also our future collaboration. In the silence, the only sound was the rustling of the paper Min-seok handed to Lee. Lee glanced at the text and turned pale. I think I'm in the wrong place. It's fine. Jin-ho turned around. There was neither anger nor a smile on his face. Min-seok, show the guest out, and make sure his interest is transferred in exactly 3 days, as agreed. No delays. When the door closed, Jin-ho returned to the table. No emotion, only calculation. Power isn't a shout, it's a silence feared to break. He knew that. This evening, he had a routine meeting at the restaurant, just another element of control. He couldn't have imagined that there, among the quiet waiters, his impeccable calculations would show their first cracks. Min-seok coughed cautiously, drawing attention. The car's here, boss, to the Silver Maple. Jin-ho nodded, adjusting his cuff. The restaurant was a major asset, neutral, refined territory where one could meet anyone without arousing suspicion. His people owned a stake there, and the chef was on the clan's payroll. Every detail was under control. The drive to the restaurant took 10 minutes. His black sedan glided silently through the nighttime streets of Gangnam. All the while, Jin-ho stared out the window, mentally replaying the terms of the upcoming deal with his partners from the port. The entrance to the Silver Maple was unremarkable, with only a small engraved sign. Inside, a quiet luxury reigned, subdued lighting, luxurious materials, and perfect soundproofing. Seeing him, the maitre d' bowed respectfully and led him into a private room on the second floor. Along the way, Jin-ho took in the surroundings with a quick, practiced glance. Everything was in order. Security was in place. The staff was moving about without fuss. 2 men were already waiting for him in the hall. They exchanged formal bows and casual remarks about the weather. The negotiations began. Jin-ho spoke little, listened attentively. His proposals clear and unemotional. During a pause while the partners studied the documents, his gaze automatically slid to the glass wall, behind which the restaurant's main dining room was visible. Everything there was going on as usual. Well-heeled guests, soft music, silent waiters. That's when he noticed her, a young woman in a formal uniform. She was serving a table near the kitchen. Her movements lacked the usual servile ease, and her face was pale and focused. She was saying something to an elderly guest, and from the hunched shoulders, Jin-ho, a connoisseur of any tension, immediately realized something was wrong. His calculations told him to look away. It wasn't his business. The staff was the manager's problem. But something in her posture, the stubborn tension in her chin, made him hold her gaze a second longer than he should have. At that moment, the restaurant manager, a red-faced man, emerged from around the corner. He said something sharply to the waitress. Jin-ho didn't hear the words, but he saw the waitress's shoulders sag even more. She shook her head and turned away. It wasn't a gesture of fear, but one of silent, desperate refusal. "Poxy, is something distracting you?" one of the partners asked politely. Jin-ho slowly turned his gaze back to the hall, his face becoming an impenetrable mask once more. "No, just assessing the situation. Continue." But somewhere in the back of his mind, where the cold accounting of all the risks and variables lived, a new tiny mark appeared. Nothing significant, just a quiet waitress who refused to lower her head. He immediately pushed the thought away. Sentimentality is a weakness, and there were no weaknesses in his system. The negotiations were successful. He left the room without looking toward the main hall. His calculations had worked flawlessly, as always. There was no crack. There couldn't be one. Meanwhile, in the utility room behind the kitchen, Kim So-yeon quickly wiped her palms on the fabric of her apron. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rage she was forcing down until she felt sick. The manager, Mr. Kang, had just called her into his office. His office smelled of expensive perfume and lies. "So-yeon-si," he began in a sweet tone. "There's been an accident, a shortage. Expensive cognac, from a storage room that only you and I have access to." She understood immediately. A week ago, she'd seen him carry out that very bottle himself, hiding it in his briefcase. "I didn't take it," So-yeon said quietly but clearly. "Unfortunately, the security cameras in that area weren't working," Kang sighed regretfully. "But we'll take your seniority into account. If you admit your guilt and deduct the cost from your salary, everything will remain between us." It was a trap. Confession would brand you a thief for life in this industry. Refusal would mean dismissal with a black mark. She looked at his smug face and imagined the bills lying on his desk at home. Electricity bills for the half-empty store. A letter from the bank with a final warning. She desperately needed that money. But she looked at him again. "I didn't take the bottle," she repeated, her voice steady for the first time that evening. "I can't take someone else's blame." She was fired 15 minutes later. The pay was a pittance, as she was accused of gross misconduct. So-yeon silently accepted the envelope, changed into her worn windbreaker, and walked out the back door. The night air of Gangnam was cold. She walked along the luxurious streets, not seeing them. Before her eyes loomed the worn glass window of the morning binding bookstore which her grandmother had opened, a store that smelled of old pages and hope. Now it smelled of debt. She gave him almost her entire salary, but it was a drop in the ocean. Working at Silver Maple was her last chance. It paid enough to barely keep afloat. And now, even that was gone. She stopped in front of the window of a glittering jewelry boutique, her reflection ghostly and alien against the backdrop of diamonds. Where would she get the money? Take out another loan? But no one would take her in anymore. Sell the store? That would be tantamount to erasing the memory of her family. Her phone buzzed in her windbreaker pocket. So-yeon glanced at the screen. Bank. Reminder. She turned off the sound, put the phone back, and continued walking toward the subway station. Her steps were quick and clear. She wasn't crying. Tears don't pay the bills. She was just thinking, looking for a way out where the walls seemed to be closing in. She had no idea that her exit, her deal with the devil, was already watching her. From the window of the departing black sedan, that same cold, assessing gaze she'd glimpsed through the glass of the private room stared back at her. It was the gaze of a man for whom her honesty wasn't a principle, but a potential asset. Jin-ho was about to look away from the scene at the staff entrance. The staff's emotional squabbles weren't his concern, but then he saw the manager, the same red-faced man. He was saying something aggressively to the girl, pointing his finger at the envelope she was holding. Jin-ho frowned slightly. He hated the mess and public scandals surrounding his assets. It attracted unnecessary attention. "Stop the car," he quietly ordered the driver. The sedan pulled up silently in the shadows. Jin-ho watched through the tinted glass. He couldn't hear the words, but his body language was as clear as a book. The manager's stance was aggressive, his nostrils flared, an attempt to intimidate. The girl's back was straight, her shoulders back, her chin raised. She wasn't crying, she wasn't pleading. She listened and then slowly, very clearly, shook her head. It was a gesture of final refusal. Then the manager, clearly furious, turned and disappeared through the door. The girl was left alone. She looked at the envelope in her hands and squeezed it so tightly that the paper crumpled. A grimace of such pure, impotent rage flashed across her face for a second that Jin-ho couldn't help but be intrigued. At that moment, a young cook jumped out of the door, looked around, and ran up to her. "So Yeon-shi." His whisper was audible even in the car. "This is unfair. We all know that it was Mr. Kang-sam." The girl raised her hand sharply, stopping him. "Quiet," she said. Her voice was low and tired, but firm. "Don't. This won't change his mind. And you still have to work here." The cook fidgeted. "But what are you going to do?" She looked down for a second, then straight ahead again. "I'll think of something. Thank you for coming." She turned and walked away, tucking the crumpled envelope into her pocket. Her gait wasn't broken, but determined, as if each step beat out a rhythm. "No, no, no." Jin-ho watched her back until she disappeared into the crowd. His mind, where everything had a price and a calculation, experienced a brief glitch. He had witnessed not a firing, but a small, isolated failure of the system. A manager had stolen and framed a subordinate. It was a standard, almost boring scheme. But usually people broke. They took the blame out of fear or for promising not to fire someone. This girl, she chose to be thrown out on the street, lose her income, rather than live with a stigma she didn't deserve. It was stupid, impractical, utterly irrational from a survival standpoint. In his world, such behavior would quickly lead to extermination. And yet, "Min-seok," Jin-ho called, not taking his eyes off the spot where she had disappeared. "Yes, boss?" "Find out everything about that waitress, Kim So-yeon, and about the manager of the Silver Maple. Details quickly." "Yes, sir." The car pulled away. Jin-ho leaned back in the leather seat. In his perfectly structured world, where every action was weighed against risk and benefit, a new strange factor had appeared: principle. An alien principle. And his brain, trained to extract benefit from everything, had already begun to consider how he could use this resilience, this unwavering honor, to his own ends. She was an anomaly. And anomalies were either destroyed or put to use. Destroying her was pointless. She meant nothing. But using her, Min-seok returned with the information an hour later. Jin-ho listened in his office, looking out over the city at night. Kim So-yeon, 24 years old, lives alone in a rented apartment in an old neighborhood. Officially, she's debt-free. Min-seok began, reading from his tablet. Unofficially, Jin-ho knew that formalities rarely reflected the essence. Big problems. Her family owned a small bookstore, Morning Binding. After her parents died, she's been trying to support it. The store is in debt. Seriously. She takes odd jobs, and almost her entire salary goes toward paying off the interest. The bank is putting it up for auction in 2 months. Why not just close it? It seems like a matter of principle, boss. A family matter. Jin-ho nodded slightly. The picture was coming together. The principle. That word again. And the manager? Kang Myung-ho. He's been with us for 3 years. Minor thefts are common practice. But this time, he stole a bottle of vintage cognac ordered by an important client. To cover up the loss, he decided to pin it on the waitress. She refused to sign a statement. This infuriated him. "He's compromising the reputation of the establishment," Jin-ho stated coldly. "Fool, what's wrong with him?" "Wait for instructions." Jin-ho stared out the window in silence for a couple of minutes. A plan was forming in his head. Clear, pragmatic. Fire the manager for gross negligence and theft. Let security give him a conversation so he understands he's better off forgetting about the restaurant and the girl. Find someone with a clean reputation to replace him. "Yes, sir." And find Kim So-yeon's contact information, address, phone number. Carefully. Min-seok nodded and left. Jin-ho was left alone. He walked over to the panoramic window. A principle. The girl had chosen honor and ended up with nothing. She desperately needed money but refused to trade her reputation, however false, for the chance to stay afloat. It was an interesting paradox. The ideal asset has no principles. But a person with principles, they can be trusted within certain limits, as long as their interests align. He imagined her face, not at the moment of humiliation, but at the moment of that quiet but firm no. In a world where everyone was for sale, such steadfastness was a rare commodity. It could be invested, made the foundation for something stable, for a cause that required not shouting and threats, but quiet, unwavering reliability. She didn't know that her principle had already been appreciated, that her honor had just saved her from being a simple, fired waitress and turned her into a potential partner in a dangerous game, a game whose rules he would write. 2 days later, there was a knock on the door of So-yeon's modest apartment. It was quiet but insistent. Min Seok stood there, dressed in an impeccable suit, his face a polite mask. Kim So-yeon-si? Yes? She was wary, recognizing him as the same assistant from the restaurant. My name is Min Seok. I represent the interests of a man who was impressed by your principled stance. He would like to offer you a business partnership. What partnership? Her voice was cold. She did not invite him in. An investment. You need funds to preserve your family business. Our employer is ready to provide capital to open your own business. A flower shop. So-yeon laughed, but there was no humor in it. A flower shop? Are you laughing at me? I'm a waitress. And who is your employer? That man from the private lounge? Min Seok nodded, not denying it. He believes that your honesty is a valuable asset. You will not have to work for him personally. You will own the business. We will provide premises in a good area, startup capital, assistance with registration. You will manage it as you see fit. And in return? So-yeon asked, looking him straight in the eye. Nobody gives that kind of money for nothing. In exchange, the salon will serve one technical function. It will become a quiescent point, a place where our couriers will occasionally come and leave envelopes to be deposited into the salon's account as revenue. You'll simply record them in the accounting department as payment for corporate orders. The risks for you are minimal. The police don't care about flower shops. And you get a legal, thriving business and a stable income to save what's important to you. Silence fell over the room. So-yeon could hear her own heart pounding. She understood. The resting point. Money laundering. She would be the cover. Why me? She whispered. Because you've already proven you can't be bought with petty theft, Min Seok answered simply. Such a delicate role requires someone who values their word. You refuse to sign a lie. So you'll sign and honor the terms of this contract. For us, it's a matter of trustworthiness. He handed her a thin folder. Here's the preliminary agreement, the financing plan, and the address of the premises. You don't need to answer now. Think about it until tomorrow. If you agree, the business is yours. If not, he shrugged slightly. We won't bother you again. Min Seok bowed and left, leaving So-yeon standing at the threshold with a folder in her petrified hands. She slowly closed the door, leaned her back against it, and opened the file. The investment figures swirled before her eyes. They would be enough not only to pay off the debts, but also to completely renovate the store. She went to the window and saw the black sedan below, where Min Seok was waiting. And in the back seat, barely visible through the tinted glass, was the silhouette of another man. The same one. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring off into the distance, as if everything had already been decided. She clutched the folder. It wasn't a helping hand. It was a net. But a net woven of golden threads, capable of pulling her out of the quagmire. The price, her clean name would become a cover for dirty money. The rules of the game were indeed written. All that remained was to decide whether she was ready to play. She spent the entire night awake. She leafed through documents. She counted and recounted the store debt. She looked at photos of her parents against the backdrop of old bookshelves. Sunrise found her sitting at the table with a blank look. There were two options. The first was to proudly refuse, look for another job, and perhaps even give in and let the bank take over the store. Everything would be fair, everything would be fair, and the memory of my parents would be reduced to an auction receipt. The second option is to accept the offer, take the chance, and live every day with the thought that her life-saving business is being tainted by something dark. By midday, her despair had crystallized into a cold, clear decision. She found Min Seok's business card in a folder and dialed the number. I agree, she said without greeting, but with conditions. I'm listening. Min Seok's voice was businesslike. I don't take money for personal needs. No cash. this is strictly an investment in the flower salon business. All income and expenses must be completely transparent and documented on my side. I manage the salon alone. Your side provides security and logistics. I don't want to know the details. I only record what is brought to me as agreed. That's reasonable, Min-seok answered. That's how it will be formalized. You will receive a clean loan agreement for starting a small business from an investment fund. Everything is legal. And one more thing, So-yeon added, looking out the window at the dusty street. If I ever decide to exit the business, how will that happen? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Provided that the investment is fully repaid with the agreed interest and confidentiality is maintained, you can sell the business or buy out the share. Our employer values order and predictability. She knew it was only half the truth. There was no way to escape this game completely. But this was her only chance. Okay, she said quietly. Where should I sign? An hour later, Min-seok was back with her with new, more detailed paperwork. So-yeon read every point. Everything looked flawless. Too flawless. As if it had been specifically designed to salve her conscience with legalistic formulations. She picked up the pen. Her fingers trembled for a second. The image of her father, rifling through old tomes, flashed before her eyes again. Books are the truth, daughter. Different, but the truth. Now her truth will have a double meaning. She signed. Congratulations on the start of our collaboration, Min-seok said, taking a copy of the contract. You'll receive the keys to the premises and the first tranche tomorrow. Our employer will check in on our progress from time to time. When he left, So-yeon sat on the floor and hugged her knees. She felt no relief. She felt one weight lifted from her shoulders, the financial one, but another settled gently, almost weightlessly, around her neck. Invisible, but strong. A noose of silk and shadow. She became a front, a cover. The price of saving the past was her present, and perhaps her future. The next morning, an unstamped, unaddressed envelope lay in her mailbox. Inside was a key to a street-level business in an upscale but relatively quiet area of Gangnam, and a debit card with a preloaded balance in the name of Morning Dew Flower Shop. That same day, she saw her future property for the first time. It was a small, bright space with large windows, perfect for a salon. The renovations had already been done. Neutral tones, light wood shelves. Everything was waiting just for her, the flowers and the furniture. It was stunning. Nothing in her life had ever happened so quickly or so efficiently. The next day, Min-seok arrived with an accountant to help with the final paperwork and open an official bank account. The process took several hours. Everyone was polite, efficient, and completely emotionless. It seemed like they were opening the salon every day. Your main task now is to make the salon operational and popular, Min-seok explained after the accountant had left. Real sales, real clients. This is the best backdrop for our additional activity. The first corporate order will arrive in a week. You'll receive an envelope. You'll deposit it in the cash register as a prepayment for a regular flower delivery for the office. It's simple. So Yeon nodded, feeling her fingers grow cold. Corporate order. That's what they called it. What if there are questions? From the tax authorities, for example? You have all the legal documents, Min-seok reassured her. You're a small entrepreneur who received an investment loan. The fund that provided you with the loan exists and pays taxes. Everything is in order, and for any surprise audits, you'll have our lawyer's direct number. He'll sort everything out. When he left, So-yeon was left alone in the empty salon. She walked around it, running her palm over the smooth countertops. Here would be a refrigerator for flowers. There a cash register. By the window, 2 tables for customers who wanted coffee. She could see it so clearly. This could be her happy, honest business. She closed her eyes. Now it was honest business with a dirty secret. She'd bought salvation for one part of her life by selling her soul to another. But what choice did she have? The bank wasn't waiting. The auction wouldn't be canceled. She took out her phone and dialed the bank manager's number. Hello. This is Kim So-yeon, about the debt from the morning binding store. Yes, I'm making my first large payment next week. Yes, I'm sure. After hanging up, she leaned against the cool glass of the storefront. It was raining outside. People were hurrying about. None of them could have imagined that this frail girl in the empty store had just made a deal that would forever divide her life into before and after. She had become a human shield for someone's shadow. And the first envelope was already on its way. The salon opened in 3 weeks, so Jan called it Prima, the first swallow, the first hope, the first lie. She poured her heart and soul into it to quell her fear. She sourced the finest flowers from trusted suppliers, arranged elegant bouquets herself, and managed her social media accounts. Her quiet smile and attention to detail quickly attracted clients, mostly wealthy women from the surrounding neighborhoods and secretaries from nearby offices. The salon became an oasis of calm and beauty, the perfect cover. The first envelope was delivered by a young man in a jacket who introduced himself as a courier from Devon Invest. He greeted her politely, handed over a thick package, took a signed receipt for an advance payment for weekly office supplies, and disappeared. So Jan, with a cool calm that frightened her, entered the amount into the accounting department. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Once a week, a courier would come, always different, always polite and on time. The system worked like clockwork. And in the evenings, after closing the salon, So-Yeon headed not home but to her old neighborhood, to the bookstore. She paid her debts strictly according to the schedule they gave her. Not a penny more, so as not to raise questions. She told no one, not the flower vendors, not even casual acquaintances, about morning binding. It was her Achilles heel, her most vulnerable spot, a weakness. And in the new world she'd entered, sharing weaknesses was mortally dangerous. One day, while sorting through new books bought with the meager remnants of the salon's profits in the dimly lit store, she heard the door creak. She turned around abruptly. Jin-ho stood in the doorway. He was alone, without Min-seok, in an expensive but discreet coat. He silently examined the dusty shelves, the cracked parquet floor, her face drawn in fear. "What are you doing here?" she breathed, instinctively shielding the half-open folder with invoices. "An investor is reviewing assets," he answered quietly, his gaze sliding over the folder. "Direct investment in an unprofitable business is a bad strategy, but I understand the sentimental value." He came closer, so Jan felt the air tighten. "You don't tell anyone about this place?" It wasn't a question, but a statement. "No," she whispered. "That's right. The world is full of eyes. And ears. Your flower shop is your forte. It's thriving. That's good. Let everyone think that this is the only thing you have." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "And So-Yeon-si?" He said her name for the first time. His voice was low, emotionless. Weaknesses should not be hidden. They must be strengthened or eliminated. There is no other way. The door closed behind him. So-Yeon stood among the books, shaking with a mixture of shame, anger, and a chilling realization. He knew. Of course he knew. He controlled everything. Her salon, her debts, her secrets. She wasn't a partner. She was a perfectly chosen instrument. And his last words sounded not like advice, but like a warning. She looked at the shelves, at the salvation that now hung heavy on her. She could no longer afford weakness, even here, in her weakest spot. From now on, she had to be strong everywhere, in the salon, in the store, and within herself. To hold on to what she loved, she had to forget what it was like not to be afraid. Jin-ho began stopping by the salon once a week, always at different times. He called them checkpoints. Officially, to assess turnover and check the reports. In reality, he'd sit at a table by the window, order a cup of coffee from her, and watch. He watched her work. She was friendly and patient with clients, listening at length to who needed a bouquet and for what occasion. With the flowers, she was respectful and meticulous, as if they were alive. There was no nervousness or fear in her movements, as he had seen that first evening outside the restaurant. There was a focused, silent confidence. She had built her own small, orderly world here. "The reports are in order," he said each time, without even opening the folder she handed him. "Keep up the good work." One winter evening, the salon was empty except for them. Snow was falling. So-Yeon was rearranging the pots of poinsettias, creating a new arrangement. Jin-ho sat and watched her fingers adjust the scarlet petals. The salon smelled of pine needles, earth, and silence. Not the heavy silence of his office, where the unspoken hung in the air, but a light, peaceful one. "Why flowers?" he asked unexpectedly. He was surprised by his own question, so Yeon flinched, but didn't turn around. "They don't lie," she answered simply. "If they withered, it means you didn't pay attention. If they bloomed, it means you did everything right. Everything is on the surface. No hidden motives." He remained silent. Her words, so simple, touched something deep inside. His entire world was built on hidden motives, on multi-layered lies. But here, in this small space, the rules were different. Transparent. Another time, he arrived while she was teaching a new intern how to trim stems properly. Don't cut at an angle, go straight. Her voice was soft but firm. Otherwise, the stem will catch on the vase, the water won't flow, and the flower will die prematurely. The base must be clean. Otherwise, everything will fall apart. Jin-ho watched her fingers deftly grip the pruning shears, making a precise, even cut. The foundation must be pure. In his world, the foundations were rotten from the start, and everything rested on intricacies, fear, and money. But here, one wrong cut ruined beauty. He stopped bringing Min-seok along on these visits. He stopped asking business questions. He simply sat, sipped coffee, and breathed in the clean, simple air. It became his ritual of purification, a moment when he could be anything but Park Jin-ho, the boss. When he could simply be a tired man. He found himself looking forward to these visits, not to check her point of peace, everything was perfect with her, but for this silence. For the opportunity to watch her build something real, something fragile and beautiful, while he only destroyed or reshaped it to suit himself. His cynicism, his steely certainty that everything has a price and is for sale, began to show microscopic cracks. Looking at her, he began to dimly understand that there are things that can't be bought. Peace, a clear conscience, or this strange, quiet beauty that was being born before his eyes. She didn't try to please him, didn't fawn. She simply did her job, and there was more power in that than in all his guards and deals. He hadn't yet named this feeling. He hadn't even considered it. But when one day, oblivious to his gaze, she smiled, adjusting a sakura branch in a vase, something inside him tightened, not painfully, but as if thawing. It was more dangerous than any threat from his competitors. A fragile truce had settled between them, built on silence. He would come, sit in his corner, and they would talk about business, new rose varieties, seasonal trends. Never about where the envelopes came from, never about what was going on behind the salon walls. She knew that behind him lay shadows, violence, and secret wars. He knew that her silence was bought with his money. But here, among the flowers, this knowledge receded, like a scary fairy tale behind a door. One spring day, So-yeon was struggling with a tall wedding arrangement. The glass vase wobbled. Jin-ho, without a word, stood and supported her as she braced the stems. His hands were close to hers. He felt the slight tremor in her fingers, not from fear, but from concentration. She felt the dry warmth of his palm. They both pulled their hands away simultaneously as the vase stood upright. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking at him. "It's nothing," he replied, returning to his table. But his fingers lingered for a long time afterward, feeling the ghostly touch. Another time, he arrived late, just as she was about to close the door. She noticed a dark stain on his jacket at the crease of his sleeve. Not dirt. It was almost black and difficult to wash out. Her gaze lingered on it for a split second. He caught her gaze. He said nothing. The following week, he was wearing a new jacket. She began to notice little things, a shadow of weariness around his eyes, which even his iron self-control couldn't hide. A slight tension in his shoulders that only eased slightly after he'd sat in the salon for 20 minutes. She never asked. He never complained. But she began pouring him a slightly weaker coffee and placing a sprig of eucalyptus or lavender on his table instead of red carnations. For scent, for peace. He, in turn, noticed that she had barely eaten all day. One day, after his visit, a discreet paper bag from a nearby deli, containing a sandwich and freshly squeezed juice, was left on her table. No note, no comment. She threw the bag away but ate the food. Silently. This attraction was undeclared. It had no right to exist. He was a crime boss. She was his proxy. Between them lay a chasm of money, fear, and lies. But across this chasm stretched invisible threads. Threads of wordless understanding, cautious care, and that agonizing, forbidden interest that arises between two people who know the worst about each other, but see something greater in the silence. She caught herself listening to the sound of his car. He caught himself canceling non-essential meetings to make it before she closed. They were playing a dangerous game, ignoring the rules. He clung to her purity like a drowning man to a straw. She saw something in his silent strength and secret vulnerability that made her heart beat faster, even as her mind screamed danger. They stood on the edge, not yet having taken a step. But the chasm between their worlds no longer seemed so insurmountable. It was filled with silence, glances, and an unspoken question. What if? A question that still had no answer. One evening, a real thunderstorm broke out. Rain lashed the shop windows and the streets were deserted. So-yeon was already turning off the light when the doorbell rang. Jin-ho stood there, without an umbrella, in a soaking wet coat. Water dripped from his hair down his face. He looked less like a boss than like a man on the run from something. "May I?" he asked, and for the first time his voice betrayed not the strain of power, but simple human weariness. She stepped back silently, letting him in. He entered, leaving a wet footprint on the floor. She closed the door and locked it. The salon was silent, except for the sound of the rain outside. "I can offer you a towel," she said hesitantly. "No need." He took off his wet coat and hung it on a chair. "Am I disturbing you?" She shook her head. She had nothing to say to him. He had interrupted her. He had burst into her quiet evening, bringing with him echoes of the world she had wanted to shut out. And yet, at the same time, she didn't want him to leave. He walked over to the counter where she'd just been working. There were some loose stems and a few unblown peonies lying there. "Why these?" he asked, pointing to the buds. "They're not ready yet. They need time. If you force them open, they'll wilt without ever revealing their beauty." He looked at the buds carefully, then turned his gaze to her. "Like some things," he said quietly. The cabin grew even quieter. Tension hung in the air, thick and resonant, like a taut string. She could feel her heart pounding. He stood so close that she could smell the rain, expensive soap, and something else. Cold metal, and the danger that was part of it. "I'm not asking what happened," she finally said, breaking the silence. "And you're not telling. It's always like that. It's safer this way, for you." His answer sounded familiar, but it lacked the same ironclad confidence. There was weariness. "And for you?" she ventured. He turned slowly to face her. His gaze was heavy, searching. "Nothing is safe for me, Seo-yeon-si, only relatively. This salon, it's relatively safe." He took a step forward. She didn't retreat. The distance between them closed dangerously close. She saw the raindrops on his eyelashes, the shadow on his cheek, the hard line of his compressed lips. She saw in his eyes not calculation, but a question. That same unspoken question. He raised his hand and she froze. But he merely gently brushed a fallen rose petal from her shoulder. His fingers barely touched the fabric of her blouse, but she felt the touch like a burn. "Sometimes," he whispered so quietly that the words were almost drowned out by the sound of the rain, "I come here not to check on business, but to remember that silence can be not empty, but full." Their gazes met and locked. It all lay in that gaze. Her fear, his danger, their shared loneliness, and that lingering, inexplicable attraction that transcended words. He was the first to look away, as if burned. "I have to go. Thanks for the shelter." He grabbed his wet coat and headed for the door. She didn't stop him. When the door closed behind him, she leaned against the counter, shivering. The air was still charged with his presence. He'd done nothing. He'd said nothing, really. But that evening, the invisible line between them had become paper thin. And they both realized it. But they weren't the only ones to notice their fleeting closeness. A man sat in a dark SUV across the street. He watched Jin-ho enter the car at an inappropriate hour and inappropriately. He saw him exit after a long moment. He saw the interior lights dim. That man was Lee Min-jun, the head of a rival clan that controlled the port and illegal imports. He was the complete opposite of Jin-ho, loud, hot-tempered, and fond of showing off his strength. Their rivalry was a cold war, ready to erupt at any moment. The next morning, Min-jun sat in his office, hung with expensive but tasteless trophies. "A flower shop?" he asked his assistant, frowning. "Prima? And that cold snake Pak visits him once a week, like he's going to work? And he even showed up yesterday during the flood?" "Yes, boss, our observations confirm it. He spends between half an hour and an hour there. No meetings with outsiders, just him and the owner." "The owner?" "Kim So-yeon, 24 years old, used to work as a waitress at the Silver Maple. Opened the salon 6 months ago with the support of an investment fund, which, according to our information, is connected to Park's people. So this is his safe house, Minjun concluded smugly. Another safe house for laundering money. Boring, but... He paused, rubbing his chin. But why does he have to sit there himself every time? He can send anyone he wants. Why does he personally need to watch a girl sell roses? Minjun's head, accustomed to simple schemes, power, money, fear, couldn't comprehend such a waste of a high-ranking official's time. There's something personal about her, he finally decided. His eyes narrowed with curiosity, bordering on greed. Is he attached to that shrew? It's ridiculous and interesting. Very interesting. He jabbed a finger roughly at his assistant. Find out everything about this Kim So-yeon. Everything. Where she's from, who her family is, where she lives, what she likes for breakfast, and about her salon, who her suppliers are, her clients, any debts, whether she's been audited by the tax authorities, the whole story. If this is his weak spot, we need to know about it. When the assistant left, Minjun leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He'd sensed something, not a vulnerability in the case. Jin-ho was too cautious for that, but a vulnerability in the person himself, an emotion, an attachment. For people like them, it was worse than a miscalculation. It was an Achilles heel. Minjun took his time. He began a quiet, methodical investigation, unaware that his curiosity about the flower girl would soon cease to be a mere tactical move and become the spark that would ignite a war. And the first to go up in flames would not be Jin-ho's empire, but the fragile, quiet peace he was trying to protect. The first inspection came a week later. 2 plainclothes tax officials showed their identification and politely but firmly asked to review the primary documents. The reason given was a scheduled on-site inspection of a small business. The nature of the inspection was questionable, but the formalities were observed. So-yeon didn't flinch. She silently brought over all the folders, the lease agreement, the investment agreement with Devon Invest, bank statements, cash receipts, invoices from flower suppliers. Everything was in perfect order, organized by folder and date. She'd kept this bookkeeping herself with fanatical meticulousness, as if she'd been preparing for this day in advance. You're very meticulous, one of the inspectors noted with some surprise, leafing through the documents. There were no traces of corporate orders. All the envelopes had been carefully processed through the bank as transfers from the legal investor, with corresponding office maintenance contracts. This is my first business. I'm trying, So-yeon replied quietly. The inspection lasted 3 hours. We left empty-handed. 2 days later, the sanitary inspection team arrived. A complaint from an anonymous client about alleged unsanitary conditions. The inspector peered into every refrigerator, checked the plant certificates and surface swabs. Everything was clean. So-yeon followed silently behind him, opening doors and handing over paperwork. Her calm was irritating. Then, problems with suppliers began. A major wholesaler suddenly announced it was suspending cooperation due to technical reasons. That same day, So-yeon found 2 new, lesser-known but high-quality suppliers. She personally visited their warehouses to confirm. Then, angry reviews from fake accounts appeared on the salon's social media, claiming the flowers wilted after a day and that the delivery service was rude. So-yeon responded to each review publicly, politely, and thoroughly, offering to look into the matter and replace the bouquet, asking for the order number. The fake accounts fell silent. She never called Jin-ho. She never wrote to Min-seok. She coped on her own, day after day, with a cool, clear mind. Every test, every obstacle only strengthened her resolve. This salon was her fortress, and she wasn't about to give it up without a fight. Jin-ho learned of the situation from Min-seok. He listened to the report, his face impassive, but his fingers lightly gripped the edge of the table. She didn't ask for anything, he clarified. Not a word, boss. She's handling it on her own, even with suppliers we don't control. Minjun is meddling where he shouldn't, Jin-ho said quietly. For the first time in a long time, his voice wasn't cold, but rather a low, dangerous wave of anger. But not anger at her, but at the one who dared to disturb her peace. He's testing my weaknesses, and he finds only strength. The irony. He stood up and walked to the window, increased surveillance of the salon, discreetly, so that not a fly slips by without our knowledge. and prepare a dossier on the inspectors who visited her, the real ones and those on Minjun's payroll. Yes, sir, and Miss Kim? Jin-ho thought for a moment. She's coping. Let her continue. But be prepared. As Min Seok left, Jin-ho looked out over the city. His calculating nature assessed the situation. Minjun wasn't attacking the business, he was attacking her. To get to him. And the fact that she stood firm, like a rock, inspired more than just respect. It ignited something primal, dark, and furious within him. The need to protect. The very thing he'd so carefully suppressed for years. His point of peace became a battlefield. And his quiet anchor proved stronger than he could have imagined. He arrived at the salon in the evening, after his last incident of the day. A refusal of service by the courier service. So-yeon was alone, sorting through her mail. Seeing him, she nodded slightly. Her face showed weariness, but not fear. Sit down, she said, pointing to his usual table. I'll make coffee. No need, he replied, remaining standing at the counter. Min Seok reported to me about the inspections, about the suppliers. She shrugged, not looking up at the envelopes. Everything is within the law. I'm fine. The law is a tool, so Yeon-si, it can be used. His voice was even, businesslike. The tax authorities are here. Call your accountant, the one the foundation provided you with. Have him be present at every inspection and record every action. That will cool them down. The Sanitary and Epidemiological Inspectorate? Do you know how many restaurants in the area pay them a monthly bonus for peace of mind? You have a lawyer. Have him send them an official request for a copy of that anonymous complaint. They're obligated by law. The complaint will disappear. She finally looked at him. In her eyes, he saw not gratitude, but a keen worldly ingenuity. You want me to pay bribes and exploit loopholes? I want you to use the resources that have already been paid for, he corrected coldly. You don't ask for help to avoid being indebted. I understand, but you're already in business. And in this game, the rules are made not only by the law, but also by the system. The system is made up of people, and people always need something. Find what they need and give it through the right channels, not directly. Through a lawyer, through service contracts, through charitable contributions to the right funds. This is not a bribe. This is business. He spoke calmly as they teach. She listened, absorbing. She hated this logic, but understood its iron inevitability. And if it doesn't work? Then, his voice became quieter but firmer. It will mean the pressure is coming from above, from whoever is behind these petty dirty tricks. And then it's my job, not yours. Your job is to keep doing what you're doing, to be impeccable. You're doing better than I expected. There was genuine appreciation, almost admiration, in his last words. She blushed and turned away. I'm simply protecting what I've built. Exactly, he said. Go on. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. And so, Yeon-si, be careful with new suppliers. Check them as thoroughly as you would an enemy. The world is full of accidents that are carefully planned. He left. The next day, a new, more experienced accountant from the fund arrived and brought the contact information for a trusted courier service. The salon's lawyer sent several official letters. The pressure from the petty officials eased sharply. But So-yeon realized the main thing. The calm was temporary. Whoever was behind this wouldn't back down so easily. And Jin-ho, while giving her advice, was actually shielding her from the real storm raging somewhere between him and Min-jun. He kept her apart from his war, making her fortress even more impenetrable. But she felt the walls of her salon were no longer just walls. They had become a front line. The silence that followed his visit was deceptive. She knew it wasn't the end. It was a respite. She continued working with renewed vigor, but now her actions were more calculated. She took his advice and began using the system. Her new accountant, a stern man in his 50s, was now present for every visit, no matter how minor, from any auditor. Her lawyer, a cold woman in a formal suit, bombarded the authorities with official inquiries on the slightest provocation. Resistance had become costly and futile for Min-jun's petty clerks. But she saw the other side of the coin. One evening, as she was taking the trash out to the salon's back patio, she noticed two men in dark clothing. They didn't approach, didn't threaten. They simply stood in the shadows across the street, watching. Not the salon. Her. These weren't the police. These were security. His security. He'd put her under protection without even asking. She didn't tell him about it. But on his next visit, as he sat silently with his coffee, she put the cup in front of him and said, without sitting down, "I saw your people." He didn't deny it. He simply nodded. "It's necessary." "I didn't ask for this." "You didn't ask for the inspections to be sorted out, but they stopped, didn't they?" He looked at her. "Some things don't require asking. They require action." She understood his logic. As the owner of the asset, he was protecting his investment. But somewhere deep down, she hoped there was more to it. What if Min-jun realizes that pressure isn't working and decides to act differently? She asked quietly. "Not through paperwork." Jin-ho's face turned stony. That dangerous, icy spark that reminded him of who he truly was flashed in his eyes. "Then he'll make the last mistake of his life," he said so quietly that the words barely rang out, yet carried absolute certainty. "And that won't be your concern anymore. Your job is to live as if this threat doesn't exist. Run your business, smile at your clients. That's the best defense. Any nervousness on your part will be a signal to him that he's on the right path." He stood up to leave. "I can't live pretending," she blurted out. He stopped and turned. His gaze softened for a split second. "Then live knowing you're protected, my protection. And as long as I breathe, not a hair of your head will fall to his whim." He left, leaving her with this double truth. He kept Min-jun at bay, waging his shadow war elsewhere, lest the flames reach her doorstep. And at the same time, with his words and his invisible guard, he drew her into the very heart of the conflict. She wasn't just a cover. She was the reason two forces had locked in silent confrontation. And her salon, this oasis of beauty and peace, became the most strategically important asset in their war. Because he wasn't protecting a business. He was protecting her. And that made everything 1,000 times more dangerous. The pressure on the Prima Salon had eased to zero. The inspections had ceased. The suppliers had returned. For So-yeon, this should have been a relief, but she felt only growing anxiety. Min-jun wasn't one to simply retreat. The silence was ominous. Her fears were confirmed by Min-seok. He arrived at the salon unexpectedly, his face tense. "We need your signature on the new insurance documents," he said matter-of-factly, but his eyes said something else. When So-yeon signed the papers, he didn't leave, but lowered his voice. "Our people in Min-jun's entourage report that he's changed tactics. He's recalled all his officials. Now his people aren't rummaging through your salon. They're looking for any other assets, connections, weaknesses, anything that might be connected to you." So-yeon's expression turned cold. Her gaze involuntarily darted to the side where the receipt for her latest bookstore payment lay in her bag. "I have no other assets," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll check that," Min-seok said softly but insistently. "And you should be prepared. If you have anything personal you want to protect, now is the time to say so." He looked at her directly, giving her a chance. She remained silent, gritting her teeth. Giving away the bookstore would mean exposing her most vulnerable spot, her true reason for agreeing to this deal. It would be an admission of weakness. Both to him and to Jin-ho? She shook her head. "I have nothing." Min-seok bowed and left. Meanwhile, at Min-jun's headquarters, a picture was already emerging. His men, having followed So-yeon, had reached an old, unremarkable neighborhood. They saw her, several evenings in a row, entering a semi-abandoned building with a sign reading, "Morning Binding." They saw her taking out trash bags and paying a courier for delivering boxes of books. "A bookstore?" Min-jun burst out laughing at the report. "Really? Is that her weak spot? It's funnier than flowers." "Our people at the bank confirmed it," the assistant said. "The store is in colossal debt. She's making payments, but the amounts are only just covering the interest. In a month and a half, the bank is putting it up for auction. It looks like all her legitimate money from the salon is going there." Min-jun stopped laughing. Understanding dawned on his face. That's it, not the salon. She protects the salon because it's her source of income. And this squalid store? That's her heart, her ghosts, her weakness, which she hides so carefully. He rubbed his hands together in satisfaction. Park Jin-ho has built walls of steel around her. But he didn't know that her fortress already had a breach. And that breach wasn't here in Gangnam, but in some godforsaken alley. Perfect. He stood up and walked to the window. "We won't touch the salon, that would be too obvious. And it would trigger a direct war with Pak. But this bookstore, it has nothing to do with him. It's her personal Achilles heel. And we'll strike there, where she least expects it, where he might not even think to defend. He turned to his assistant, his eyes shining with anticipation. Find a way, quickly, cleanly, and without any direct connection to us. I want this morning binding of hers to cease to exist, not on paper, in reality, so that she understands what it means to cross the wrong people, so that her heart breaks before we even get to her body. The assistant nodded and left. Minjun was left alone, looking out over the city at night. He had found a weakness, not Jinho's, but his lover's, and he was going to use it to strike a blow from which the cold and calculating Park Jinho would be unable to recover. This war from the world of shadows and money was about to become very, very personal. It happened late at night. So-yeon was sleeping in her apartment when the phone rang deafeningly. It was her elderly neighbor who lived across the street from the store. So-yeona, there's a fire. In your store, he screamed into the phone, his voice breaking with terror. She bolted. Throwing on the first clothes she could find, she ran out into the street and hailed a taxi. Her heart pounded the entire way, and her mind was filled with one thought. No, 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 not this. As she pulled up, her world collapsed. 2 fire trucks stood in front of the morning binding. The bright red glow had already died down, but the acrid, choking smell of burning and wet ash hung in the night air. The store's windows were shattered, the glass blackened. Thick black smoke billowed from the door. Firefighters were dragging hoses inside. She tried to rush forward, but the firemen's strong arms held her back. "Owner, is there anyone there?" she asked, not recognizing her own voice. "No one. Looks like the fire started in the utility room. Electrical, probably. Are you the owner?" She nodded, unable to speak. She was allowed to come closer once the fire was completely extinguished. She peered inside. What she saw wasn't destruction, but desecration. The shelves her father had built were blackened and tilted. Mountains of books, her old friends, were now a wet, charred mass, emitting a nauseating odor. The walls were coated in black soot, like morning crepe. Her small cash register, the very one her grandmother had used, had melted into a shapeless lump of plastic and metal. An accidental fire. Electrical. Everyone said so. But she knew it in her bones. It wasn't an accident. It was a blow. Precisely calculated and merciless. Her world, her memories, her reason for enduring all this, it was all reduced to ashes. She didn't remember leaving. She walked through deserted streets, feeling neither cold nor tired. Tears streamed silently down her face, leaving white streaks on her soot-blackened skin. A deafening roar filled her head. Instinct, stronger than reason, led her to the only place she still had left. The salon. She mechanically took out the key, opened the door with trembling hands, and stepped inside. The scent of flowers and fresh air, usually so calming, now made her nauseous. The contrast was unbearable. Here, ideal, purchased beauty and peace. There, the destroyed truth of her life. She didn't turn on the light. She fell to her knees on the cold tiled floor, hugged herself, and finally uttered her first sound. A quiet, heart-rending groan that erupted from the very depths of her being. And then she simply shook in silent sobs as she sat in the darkness among the silent witnesses of the flowers, mourning what could never be returned. That's exactly how he found her. Jinho had arrived after receiving an urgent message from Min Seok about a fire. He entered the salon without knocking. The door was unlocked. In the dim light of the streetlights, he saw her figure huddled on the floor, and he smelled her, sweet, cloying, and alien, the smell of burning, which she had brought with her. He flicked the switch. Light splashed, causing her to flinch and cover her face with her hands. He saw her clothes, stained with soot, wet, her face, swollen from tears with black streaks. "So, Jan." His voice sounded unusually quiet. She slowly raised her head, and in her eyes, which he was used to seeing calm or focused, a sea of primal pain and fury raged, such that he took a step back. "Go away," she hissed, her voice hoarse from crying and smoke. "What happened?" "You ask?" She laughed, and the sound was more terrible than any scream. She rose to her feet, swaying. "You who know everything, control everything? My shop. Morning binding, burned, to the ground. An accidental fire, they say." She took a step towards him. "This is not an accident. This is your war, the war of your filthy world that has come to me. So Jan, calm down. He tried to speak evenly, but everything inside him was frozen solid. Calm down, she screamed now, breaking into a shriek. Tears streamed down her face again. Everything was there. Everything that was left of my parents. All my memories. The reason I even agreed to that damn deal. I sold you my honor to save him. And what did you do? You brought that monster to me. And he burned him. He burned my life. She poked his chest with her finger, not feeling the pain in her hand. You were talking about protection? What protection? You were protecting the salon, your asset. But you left my real life, my soul, unprotected. Because you weren't interested in it. For you, it was just weakness. The weakness you told me about. And it was destroyed. Every word she said hit like a bullet. He could see her pain, and it burned through his armor. I'll deal with Minjun, he said firmly, trying to regain control. No! She screamed at the top of her voice, drowning him out. I don't need you to deal with this. I need you to disappear. It's over, do you understand? The deal is off. Take your salon, your dirty money, your envelopes. I won't be your front anymore. I don't owe you anything anymore. She ripped the salon logo badge from her neck and threw it at his feet. Then she tried to walk past him toward the exit. He grabbed her hand. Not roughly, but firmly. Where will you go? Let go! She broke free and recoiled. Anywhere, to the ends of the earth. Anything to get away from you and this darkness you drag along with you. You thought I was your anchor, but it turns out I'm just a buoy marking the spot of your shipwreck. And my shop was the first victim. No more. She ran out into the street, leaving him alone in the brightly lit, fragrant salon. Her badge lay on the floor. The smell of burning and despair hung in the air. Jinho stood motionless. Her words full of pain and truth echoed within him. She was right. He wasn't protecting her. He was protecting his illusion, his pure place. But he ignored her true heart, the reason she endured all this. Because he didn't consider it part of the deal. For the first time in many years, he felt not cold calculation, but an all-consuming, oppressive sense of guilt. And he realized that he had just lost more than a figurehead. He had lost the only person who looked at him as anything other than a boss. And that was more terrifying than any threat Minjun could have made. Jinho didn't stop her. He watched her silhouette dissolve into the night and felt something inside him crumble. Not a strategy, not a plan, something far more fundamental. He slowly picked up her badge from the floor. The plastic was warm from her body. He clutched it in his fist until the edges dug into his palm. The silence of the salon, once a comfort, now oppressed him. The flowers on the shelves seemed a silent reproach to him, a symbol of the purity he had desecrated simply by approaching. He was to blame, not indirectly. Not as a player who lost a turn. Personally, he had drawn her into his game without protecting everything that mattered to her. He thought he controlled everything, but he failed to appreciate the simple human attachment to an old bookstore. For him, it was an asset. For her, it was her soul. And that was his whole failure. He thought he could shield her from his darkness by building a glass wall like a flower shop. But the darkness seeped in. It always does, as long as you're in it. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of the display case. He saw the clan leader, a cold, calculating architect of shadows. This was the man who had just driven the only woman who saw anything more in him to hysterics. Who spoke to him not out of fear, but because she seemed to believe that somewhere beneath that armor there was a human being. He couldn't have her, not like this. Not as Park Jin-ho, the boss. That role demanded sacrifice, compromise, cruelty. It required leaving weak points unprotected if they didn't fit into the strategy. He couldn't be with her and continue being who he was. It was an illusion he'd been living in for these months. And Minjun's cowardly attack didn't just burn down the store. He burned the bridge Jin-ho had tried to build between his two worlds. He exposed the futility of that undertaking. Jin-ho pulled out his phone. His face was a stony mask, but inside, a storm raged. Min Seok, find her immediately. Find out where she went. Provide her with 24/7 security, hidden, so she doesn't suspect a thing. If she gets even a scratch, the culprits will disappear. Yes, boss. And Minjun? With Minjun, Jinho's voice became low and dangerous. I will deal with him personally. Otherwise, no negotiations, no half measures. I want everything he has. All the information, all the incriminating evidence, every dirty deal, gather it all, and prepare the documents for the transfer of the clan's legal assets to the manager, the full legal framework. There was a long, shocked silence on the line. Boss, do you want to quit? I want to have a choice, Jinho snapped, so that the next time I want to protect something, I don't have to choose between a role and a person. In the meantime, I will finish the war I started. But this will be Park Jin-ho's last war as boss. He hung up. The point of no return had been passed. He'd once chosen this life for power, to never feel vulnerable. Now he understood that true vulnerability was the fear of losing someone. And to stop being afraid, he had to stop being the one creating that threat. His path to redemption lay not through protecting the salon, but through destroying everything that could hurt her again. Starting with himself, the persona he'd lived in all these years. He stepped out of the car, leaving the lights on, as if that could ward off the shadow he'd brought with him. The car was waiting for him. He didn't get in. He sent the driver home and walked through the nighttime Gangnam. Passers-by hurried about their business, oblivious to the man in the expensive coat, whose face was a petrified mask. His thoughts worked with cold, merciless clarity, but now their direction had shifted. He wasn't thinking about how to strike back at Min-jun with maximum benefit. He was thinking about how to destroy him completely, without the possibility of recovery. How to erase him from his life, and, most importantly, from So-yeon's life forever. Risks, losses, possible war with other clans. All of this faded into the background in the face of one simple goal. He took out his phone and made another call, not to Min Seok, but to the man he spoke to once every few years. The archivist. The keeper of the dirtiest, most secret information on every important figure in the city. I need everything on Lee Min-jun, not just his business, personal stuff, the weak points of his people, his lovers, his family. Anything that could ruin not only his business, but himself. The price is irrelevant. It will take time, came the emotionless voice on the other end. You have 24 hours. I'll pay 10 times as much. He hung up and continued walking. He reached the same old neighborhood where the morning bind was located. The street was cordoned off with yellow tape, and the smell of burning still hung in the air. He stood in the shadows across the street and looked at the blackened husk of the building. Her soul was here, and he allowed it to be trampled. Previously, this thought would have only caused him annoyance at a strategic error. Now it caused physical pain, an unbearable alien feeling. He realized a simple truth. He could build 1,000 salons for her, give her back millions, but he couldn't bring back the ashes of those books, that scent of her childhood. He couldn't fix it with money or force. The only thing he could do was ensure that whoever did this could never harm her or anyone else again, and remove the greatest source of danger from her path, himself, as the boss. He turned and walked away. He had no plan to regain her trust. Perhaps it was no longer possible, but he did have a plan to fulfill the last, most important mission of his old life, to clear the horizon for her, even if there was no place for him in this new, pure world. At that moment, he ceased to be Park Jin-ho, the head of a clan clinging to power. He became a man who had made a choice for her, not the empire. And this decision, cold and final, brought him a strange, bitter peace. The battle was lost, but the war for her future was only just beginning. And he intended to win it, even if it cost him everything he had. The meeting was scheduled for neutral territory, a private club owned by an old respected family broker. Min-jun arrived with 6 bodyguards, confident, expecting negotiations over the division of spheres of influence, or, at worst, an ultimatum. He was prepared for bargaining, threats, and perhaps even a shootout. Only Jin-ho entered the conference room, alone. Without Min Seok, without security. He was wearing a dark suit, his face calm, almost tired. In his hands, he carried a simple cardboard folder. Alone? Brave, Min-jun chuckled, lounging in his chair. Or a fool? Where are your people? My people are where they need to be now, Jin-ho answered quietly, sitting down opposite him. We'll have a frank talk. Min-jun snorted. About what? About that crybaby whose shop burned down? Too bad, of course. An unfortunate coincidence. Shut up, Jin-ho interrupted. His voice didn't rise, but it carried such an icy, absolute command that Min-jun paused for a second. I didn't come to listen to your excuses. I came to show you your future. Jinho opened the folder and began laying out documents on the table. Not in stacks, but one by one, slowly, like cards in a deadly game. This is your accountant's report for last year, with notes from my analysts. See here, 2 billion won, carried out through fictitious fish exports. Stupid. Too noticeable. These are transcripts of conversations between your assistant and the harbor master about a shipment of contraband. Date, time, amounts, voicemail. A funny thing. This is the medical report on your younger brother, the one you sent to Switzerland for treatment for pneumonia. In reality, it was an overdose. And you covered it up by bribing the doctors. They say his mother still doesn't know. And this is my favorite. Jinho put down the last sheet. Photos. You and the wife of the head of the organized crime department, in such a place and at such a time. Careless. With each document, Minjun's face flushed, then turned sallow. He snatched up the sheets, crumpled one, but Jinho only pulled clean copies from the folder. This is a bluff, Minjun shouted, but panic was already evident in his voice. No, Jinho said. This is the end. All of this is already in my lawyer's safe, with instructions. If anything happens to me, Kim So-yeon, or her property within the next 48 hours, copies will be sent to the prosecutor's office, the tax office, the police, and your mother personally. And that boss's wife. And the mainstream media? Jinho leaned back in his chair. I don't demand your territory. I don't demand money. I demand one thing. You disappear. Not from the city, from life. You resign due to health reasons. Sell your legal assets at my price. And close all the illegal ones. Your people will either leave with you or join me on my terms. No war. A quiet exit. Are you crazy? You have no choice. Jinho finished coldly. I can destroy you now by sending these papers. It will be a war, you will lose and go to prison for 300 years. Or you leave quietly, saving face in front of your mother and at least some money. Choose. Minjun was breathing heavily, his fists clenched. He looked at the calm man across from him and knew he had lost. Not in strength, not in courage. In composure and preparation, Jinho had taken a tack no one expected. A complete, merciless revelation. Why? Minjun hissed. Because of that girl. You're risking everything because of some... Yes, Jinho interrupted sharply, raising his voice for the first time. A fire flashed in his eyes. Because of her. You didn't touch my property. You touched hers. And that was your last mistake. Now choose. Prison and shame, or obscurity and relative freedom. You have 1 minute. Jinho didn't draw his gun. He didn't call security. He simply sat, surrounded by silence, and the evidence of someone else's downfall spread out on the table. His weapon was the truth. The dirty, ugly truth about Minjun's life. And it proved more terrifying than any weapon. In this room, he wasn't a boss defending territory. He was an executioner carrying out a sentence. A sentence he'd passed on himself, on his old life. And Minjun became the first and most necessary victim on this path. Minjun chose a quiet exit. He signed the documents and dismissed the people. That was the end of their agreement. But Jinho didn't believe him for a second. A man capable of arson was also capable of revenge. So Jinho launched his second, final plan. He didn't go to the highest levels. He went to accountants, lawyers, and hackers. Those who had been balancing Minjun's books for years knew about every shady deal. Jinho bought their silence and then their testimony. He collected not criminal evidence, but financial evidence. Forged contracts, double-entry bookkeeping, evidence of massive tax evasion. He then anonymously passed the package on to the tax police and financial intelligence. These agencies hate having their money stolen more than they hate having gunshots fired in the streets. It was a clean, boring operation of the system, requiring no direct intervention from him. But to ensure this machine would run smoothly and not drag him down with it, Jinho paid. He didn't hand over incriminating evidence against himself. He gave money, enormous, unimaginable sums to his key patrons in the security forces. Not as a bribe, but as gratitude for their cooperation in the fight against economic criminals. He bought himself immunity for the duration of this operation, and so he gave up territory. Several lucrative districts controlled by his clan were ceded to other, smaller factions. So they would be preoccupied with dividing up the land and not try to stab him in the back while he beheaded Minjun. It was a strategic retreat that looked like weakness, but was actually a clearing of the field. Minjun's arrest was quiet and bureaucratic. He was picked up right in the office of his legitimate construction company. The charges were fraud and large-scale tax evasion. No shooting, no romance. Just numbers and documents he couldn't explain. When Min Seok brought a report on the losses, the gratitude paid, and the ceded territories, Jin Ho merely asked, "Is he in solitary confinement? Has his access to communications and lawyers been cut off?" "Yes, boss. His case will drag on for years." "Good. Begin negotiations for the sale of the remaining legal assets." "Quiet. We're closing." He destroyed the enemy not with brute force, but with system. And to do it cleanly, he had to buy off some and back down from others. He lost a third of his influence and half his accumulated capital. But he bought the most important thing, a guarantee that Minjun would never rise again and never look in So-yeon's direction. He traded his power for her safety. And for him, this was the only right course. A month passed. Min Seok took over the clan. It was an unexpected but logical choice. Min Seok knew all the legal schemes, was a skilled negotiator, and was untainted by brutal violence. Jin Ho handed over control to him, retaining only nominal shares in a few businesses for appearance's sake. His departure was formalized as a retirement due to health reasons. In the world he ruled, people stopped fearing him. Gradually, they began to forget him. The bookstore's restoration took 3 weeks. Jin Ho didn't ask for permission. He hired the best renovation crew, a designer, and security and fire safety specialists. He personally selected the materials: warm wood for the shelves, special glass for the display cases that resists fading in the sun, and a modern climate control system for the books. He wasn't trying to recreate the old store, he was building a new one, sturdy, beautiful, and impenetrable. With cameras, smoke detectors, a reinforced door, and 24-hour security monitoring connected to a private agency, he transformed morning binding into a small, impenetrable fortress for books. On the last day, when the workers had taken out the trash, he came there alone. The air smelled of fresh paint and wood. The shelves stood empty, awaiting books. He placed a small box on the counter. Inside was the store key and an envelope with the title, Deeds. Everything was registered to Kim So-yeon. No strings attached, no hidden contracts. A pure gift. Or rather, a repayment of a debt. He didn't expect her to forgive him. He didn't even expect to see her again. He was simply fixing what could be fixed. He couldn't bring back her memories. But he could give her a new, strong place where those memories would be safe, where the fire from the past would never again reach her future. He left the store, checked the security door one last time to make sure it closed smoothly and securely, and left. His job was done. The shadow known as Park Jin-ho, the boss, had retreated. What remained was simply a man who had realized too late the value of everything he touched, and who now bore his loneliness as the only just punishment. The next day, he arrived at Prima. The salon was open as usual, but it was run by a new receptionist, hired by Min Seok. The flowers on the shelves were fresh, but for Jin-ho, the place was dead. He didn't go inside. He stood by the display case for a few minutes, watching the unfamiliar girl smile at a customer. Her silence was gone. He turned around and left. Forever. He settled into a small modern apartment in a nice but not pretentious neighborhood. No bodyguards, no meetings. He began studying what he had previously only dealt with as a tool: the stock market, cryptocurrencies, venture capital. His mind, honed on complex systems, quickly grasped the new rules. He became a private, highly successful investor. His name was no longer a household name, but his account was growing. Sometimes in the evenings, he passed by the bookstore. Not every day, so as not to look like a stalker. Once a week, maybe twice. He didn't go close. He watched from his car or from the cafe across the street. One afternoon, he saw a car pull up to the store and So-yeon get out. He froze. She stood in front of the door, looking at the new sign, the new glass. She didn't move for several minutes. Then she slowly inserted the key, which she probably found in the mailbox, and went inside. She stayed there for over an hour. He waited. When she emerged, her face showed neither happiness nor sorrow. It was one of deep, concentrated thought. She examined the facade, touched the door handle, glanced at the cameras. Then she drove away. He saw her a few more times after that. She arrived with boxes of books. Then with furniture, an old restored armchair he recognized. It had stood in the corner of the store before the fire. She was returning bits of the old to this new space. He never once tried to speak to her. His presence would have been an insult. He was the architect of her pain and her new refuge. And in her eyes, these two roles could not meet in the same person. He accepted it. He fixed what he'd broken. Not to seek forgiveness, but because it was the only thing left for a man who'd finally figured something out. His punishment wasn't prison or a competitor's bullet. His punishment was this quiet daily knowledge. He could give her everything except the one thing she might have wanted. For none of this to ever happen, and he had to live with that knowledge. 6 months passed. The morning binding bookstore reopened. So-yeon didn't throw a big celebration. She simply opened the door and turned on the light. The new shelves were filled with books, some from the Fire's original restoration, some new, carefully selected. One afternoon, a man walked into the store. Not Jin-ho, his lawyer, a woman in a formal suit. Kim So-yeon-si, I have a business proposal for you from the Horizon Investment Fund. They're impressed with your story and your vision for reviving the local cultural scene. The fund would like to offer you a partnership. Investment and development, including the creation of an online platform and a small reading club. A royalty-free share for you. Management for you. Their share is purely financial. All documents are transparent. Here, So-yeon looked through the papers. The fund's name meant nothing to her. But at the very end, under beneficiaries, in small print, it read, Park Jin-ho, minority passive investor. She stared at the name for a long time. Then she looked up at the lawyer. Conditions? The only condition is a quarterly financial report. No interference in management. The fund believes in you. And he? So-yeon asked quietly. Mr. Park asked me to tell you that this is a purely business proposal. He will not appear here unless you want him to. His role is solely to provide financing, like any other investor. She looked at the documents again. This wasn't a handout. This was a bridge. Clean, transparent, built according to all the rules. A bridge he wouldn't set foot on without her invitation. Okay, she said. I agree. From that day on, her business began to grow. A website appeared, literary evenings began to be held. The store became the place she'd dreamed of, and Jin-ho appeared in her life again. But not the same one. At first it was business emails, short, respectful, and to the point. Then, once a month, he started coming to the store. Not as the owner, but as a customer. He bought books. He never approached her first if she was busy. He'd simply pick something from the shelf, place it on the register, quietly say, thank you, and leave. One evening, when the store was empty, he lingered by the shelf with contemporary fiction. She watched him. Are you going to just buy books? She asked, unable to bear it. He turned around. His face was not its usual mask. There was weariness and caution. If you allow it. If not, I will stop coming. Why are you doing this? Her voice wavered. The store has already been restored. The debt has been paid. You are free to go. He put the book back on the shelf. Because freedom isn't about leaving. Freedom is about having somewhere to return to. And to return, you have to earn the right to be there, even if it's from a distance. I'm learning. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He deserved it. With every quiet visit, every promise kept, every penny invested not in money laundering, but in her dream. Their romance didn't begin with passion. It began with a quiet conversation at the checkout counter that evening. Then with a cup of tea she offered him one day when he arrived in the rain. Then with a joint discussion of a business plan for a reading club. He was no longer the boss. He was Jin-ho, a man who saw her not as an asset or a weakness, but as an equal. Who listened to her opinions on books and admitted that he himself didn't understand them, but wanted to learn. They walked slowly. Every step was painstakingly taken and measured. But there was no lie in it. There was truth, forged from ashes. His redemption lay not in a grand gesture, but in a daily, quiet choice to be better. And her gift to him was not forgiveness, but a chance. A chance to show who he could be when the crown and cloak of shadows were removed. And amid the scent of old pages and fresh paint, in a place once destroyed by his world, something new began to sprout, fragile, yet strong, like the binding of an old book that had withstood the fire.